What we're going to be talking about today is right-sizing your systems, and there's a lot of things that we want to discuss concerning best practices. We want to try and answer as many of those questions that you might have lingering in your mind as possible today. So here's a loose agenda of what we're going to go through. First, we're going to talk about some sizing considerations. So when we're going into creating a design, what questions should we have in our mind when we're talking about sizing a solar system, about selecting the right equipment? We're going to talk about some best practices for recommendations for your inverter selection. So main thing we're going to discuss here is what we're thinking about when we're thinking about oversizing a system and how far we can oversize the inverters by. And then we're going to have some best practices to help you avoid MPUs as well. We'll go ahead and wrap up today. We're going to spend some time troubleshooting live with Cameron Stewart, our Senior Technical Marketing Manager and our technical expert, to help you solve those issues that you might be having. And we do have some issues that were sent in advance that we'll be adding. We had some people that were very passionate about getting their questions answered that sent us a couple issues in advance. All right, so starting us off, one thing to remember about SolarEdge when we're considering sizing is that every SolarEdge system at its very base is two pieces of important equipment. We've got those power optimizers that are on the back of every single solar panel, getting you the most out of every single panel. And we've got that centralized inverter on the wall that's harvesting that maximum amount of energy and getting your customers the most for their money. So there's sizing considerations when we're thinking about both of these devices. First, let's talk about the optimizer. How do I know what size optimizer to choose for my system? And this can be a tricky tricky question. Taking a look at your proposal tool, you might see a bunch of different numbers on the optimizers. What I'm happy to tell you is it's a lot more simple than it looks like at its face. When we're looking at those optimizer serial numbers, the good news here is that the serial number actually corresponds to the maximum size of solar panel that it can support. So just for example here, if we have our S440 optimizer, what that means is that will support up to a 440 watt solar panel. So when we're looking at that serial number, we're looking at that number that's there. We know that we'll support up to that number of solar panel. And that's a way of choosing that optimizer. Cameron, any additional information you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and to be clear, it's the part number. We want to look at the part number.
Part number, not serial number.
Yeah, that's 440 optimizer.
My bad.
Yeah, no worries. And then additionally, we always have to check for voltage and current too. But SolarEdge usually has always done the math for you, and Ash is absolutely right. In general, S440 will support a lot of modules up to 440 watts. There are some outliers there, like the REC Alpha Peers have a very high current, and so we'll have a different optimizer for those. But the good news is we do have a SolarEdge design tool that has a very quick way to check those module to optimizer compatibility. Or again, if you're using a third party like Aurora or Solar or whatever, I work with those guys very regularly, and they are recommending the best optimizer for those solar panels.
Awesome. We actually have a question coming through the chat. What does the S stand for in the optimizer model? Some have a P.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we had P for power optimizer. Then we developed a cool technology that we called Sense Connect. And Sense Connect basically just detects heat rise in the connection point. So if you don't get your connector plugged in all the way, you didn't hear that click, we look for temperature rise, which is arcing and leads to failures and stuff like that. So we're just measuring temperature, and the S stands for safe or Sense Connect.
Awesome. I gotta say, I knew that the difference between the models, but I'm not sure I knew exactly what the letters meant. So good to have some insight on that.
Yep.
All right, so let's move into some of these questions. Go ahead.
And sorry, real fast. You're also going to see U coming here shortly, and the U means domestic content made in United States. So they still have Sense Connect, but now they're just made in Florida.
Hey, awesome. Great heads up. So let's talk about some of these questions that we frequently get from sales reps when we're interacting with them on system sizing, and some of these considerations, these questions that you want to have in mind when you're sizing your system. So in line with what we were talking about with the part numbers on the optimizers, a lot of people when they're selecting their inverters in their proposal tools, they're looking at these numbers and saying, hey, what do these inverter numbers mean? How do I know how to pick the correct one? And this is something this one of the still most frequent questions that we get from sales reps. So the first thing to talk about is that the number on the part number of the inverter equals the AC output of that inverter in watts. So just for example here, if we're looking at something like SE3800, what that means is that inverter is going to support have an AC output of 3,800 watts or 3.8 kilowatts if we make that conversion into kilowatts. So when we're looking at each and every one of these models, SE3800, hey, 3.8 kilowatt. SE57, 5.7 kilowatt. SE6000, 6,000 kilowatt. SE7600, 7.6, and etc. So as we go down the line, when you're looking at these in your proposal tool, what we want to think about is this is going to be that AC output. So this is going to help us move towards sizing our system and choosing the right inverter for the size of system. But there are more considerations beyond just this. One of the things we want to think about, because it becomes important when we think about how far we're oversizing this system. What does this system design look like? First and foremost, does it have multiple roof planes? If we're putting our solar panels on multiple roof planes, we may want to think about maximizing that energy gain as the sun moves through the sky. So we may want to increase our oversizing just a little bit if we're installing on multiple roof surfaces or multiple roof planes. Is the customer going to be using a self-consumption battery? If a homeowner is using a self-consumption battery, that gives us a little bit more room to increase that oversizing. Because we know with SolarEdge, our battery sits on the DC side. So if the inverter can't immediately convert all of that energy, we can actually store it in the battery for later use. And that gives us a little more flexibility to utilize that energy later on down the line. Some other considerations here. Thinking about our main service panel, because we know that anytime that we're going to need to do any work on the main service panel, that's going to increase our cost on the job. That affects us in one of two ways. Either we as the sales rep are going to have to take a hit on commission in order to accommodate that increase in price, or we're going to have to go back to that customer and sell them on the increased price of that main service panel work. So we want to try and avoid that as frequently as possible. So a couple questions when we're looking at the home's main service panel is what size is the main service panel? And that can be a little tricky to look for. There's a couple places once you get into the main service panel itself. If you're selling remotely, if you have the homeowner send you a couple pictures of the main service panel, or if you're there in person, sometimes that main breaker on the main service panel is going to have it printed right there. It's going to have that bus bar rating printed out for you. But if it's not there, the device rating is usually on this paper that's on the door of the main service panel. As you can see, we've zoomed this one in for you. We're showing that this one's a 400 amp main service panel, which isn't common. Usually you see a 100, 150, or 200 amp are the most common. And I see a question here from Jerry. Do you guys have a power control system? Good news here, Jerry, and I think Cameron will probably have more insight, but our home hub inverter is enabled with PCS.
That is correct. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I was just seeing if you had any additional insight or if that was the full answer there.
Yeah, no, we do support multiple levels of power control systems for PCS. So we have export limitation, we have branch current management, where you're basically looking at our bus bar current management. So we're looking at the bus bar to make sure it doesn't overheat, so we can install larger systems on smaller service entrances. And then we also have charging from solar only. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for the insight. All right, moving on. And the recommendations we're making on the main service panel today, these are when we're not considering PCS for areas where it may not be approved yet. So taking a look at some oversizing guidelines, when we're thinking about how far to oversize this system, there's a couple of different ways to look at this. If we're looking at 140% oversizing, this is kind of our first recommendation. This is a safe oversizing percentage. The good thing about oversizing by 140% is this can be used with absolutely any system profile. This is kind of your catch-all oversizing percentage. So with a SolarEdge system, you can always safely oversize by 140%. 155%. This is your maximum oversizing when you're not utilizing a battery. So this is your maximum recommended oversizing. When would you want to use this? Well, as we spoke about, when you're taking a look at an installation, you see that you're going to be installing on multiple roof planes. That's where you may want to use this 155% oversizing, because with that, you can kind of maximize what's going on up on the roof as the sun moves through the sky. And lastly, 200%. This is the absolute maximum that we can oversize a system using SolarEdge. And to do this, we want to make sure that we have a SolarEdge home battery attached to this. Now, if you were to oversize to this without the battery, it wouldn't fry the inverter or anything like that. It's just that you wouldn't be able to utilize all of that extra energy. You'd end up with some clipping. So for 200% oversizing, you definitely want to have a battery included with that. Okay, it looks like we're seeing someone saying that Energy Trust only allows the go up to 135%. Yes, Jerry, there's going to be specifications where maybe you're working with the TPO and they have their own rules on oversizing. In those cases, you want to stick to those guidelines. These are just for, let's say that you don't have guidelines already. This is kind of where you can use this knowledge to guide you towards that right oversizing percentage for you. But if the provider you're using only allows up to 135%, definitely go with that recommendation first.
Yeah. And I've been answering some of these questions as they come in the chat. So
I
got your back, Ash.
Awesome. All right. So how do we calculate this max system size? So luckily, even though it's math, and I don't know if you guys are the same way, but I absolutely hate math. The math is pretty simple here. To calculate what our max system size per inverter is going to be, what we want to do is we want to take that inverter size. We're going to multiply that by our percentage of oversizing. That's going to give us the maximum system size that we can install on that inverter. Just an example here. So let's say that we had a 7.6 inverter and we were going to use a self-consumption battery with this. So we're going to go up to that full 200%. So what we want to do is we want to take 7.6 and we're going to multiply that by 2. That gives us a maximum system size on this inverter of 15.2 kilowatt. So on a 7.6 inverter, you can go up to 15.2 kilowatt. The great news here, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself, is that lands on a 40 amp breaker. So that means on a 200 amp main service panel, we can have up to a 15.2 kilowatt system when we're using a battery.
And
another example here.
Sorry, ahead, of course, that's without PCS. Like if you had busbar current management, you could go even more and upsize your inverter. And then one last thing to Jeremy's point, this is just a capability that we have, not a requirement. Like you don't have to go up to 200%. You just can.
Yeah, sorry. Absolutely. Another example here. Go ahead. Sorry, Cameron.
Yeah, no, sorry. I was going to say, yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Please continue.
Another example. Let's say we had a 3.8 kilowatt inverter, and we're just going to do the 155% oversizing. So don't have a battery on this system, but we do have multiple roof planes. We want to maximize what's going on up there. That would mean on our smallest inverter and model for Home Hub, we can go up to a 5.89 kilowatt max system size, oversizing at 155%. So that, again, that's the equation there, is we're multiplying the inverter size by the percentage of oversizing. So putting all of these things together, how do we ensure that we're creating a system size that's going to meet our customers' needs, but also making sure that we're avoiding those expensive electrical upgrades, like those main service panel upgrades or those breaker derates or line side taps or whatever we have to do if we need to do some sort of work on that main service panel? Well, before the world of PCS, if we're not using PCS, what we need to keep in mind is the NEC 120% guideline. What this means is that the solar breaker cannot exceed 120% of the main service panel rating. And I hate to be the one to tell you, but there is math involved here. The good news here is I'm going to give you very simple answers for all of SolarEdge's inverter models so that we don't have to do that math. We'll just have a guideline set up for us. But the math here is if we wanted to figure out what our maximum breaker size is going to be, we want to take that main service panel rating and we're going to multiply that by 1.2. And then we're going to subtract out that main service panel rating again. Because that's going to tell us how much we can exceed the main service panel rating by. So for example, if we're looking at a 100 amp main service panel, the maximum there is going to be a 20 amp solar breaker. 150 amp, we're looking at a 30 amp breaker. And for a 200 amp, a 40 amp max is what we're looking at. Again, all of these calculations are not factoring in PCS. So when we're looking at our available inverter sizes, here's how the breakdown looks. For a 3.8 kilowatt, it's 20 amp, 5.7 is going to be on a 30 amp breaker, or 7.6 is on a 40 amp breaker. And we find in a lot of cases, for a lot of systems that homeowners need, the 7.6 tends to be the sweet spot because that falls on that 200 amp main service panel. Once you start getting further than that, you've got your 10 kilowatt and your 11.4. Those sit on a 60 amp breaker. So that would be a little larger than a 200 amp main service panel. And you probably need to do some sort of work if the homeowner had a 200 amp. All right. So on every one of these calls, we want to get a little bit of practice in here. Make sure that the things that we're talking about are landing with you guys. So we've got a little exercise here. We're going to go through some customer scenarios, and based on the customer scenario, want to see if you guys can be the sales experts and figure out what size inverter we should be using for this customer scenario. So get your calculators ready. Here we go. All right. So looking at Julie here. With Julie, we spoke to her. We've determined after taking a look at her bills that she's going to need about an 8 kilowatt system to cover her electricity needs. So her panels are going to be spread out over multiple roof planes. So we know that we can probably go up to that 155% oversizing. And she has a 150 amp main service panel. With all of these details, team, for some swag, what size inverter should you use with Julie's installation? You can go ahead and throw that in the chat or the Q&A. I'd love to hear from you guys.
Hey, Ash, will this slide deck be sent out?
Yeah, we'll send this out after the call.
I figured that was the answer. Maybe even the recording.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll have the recording available on YouTube as well.
I see a lot of 5.7s and 7.6s.
Yeah, absolutely.
10.
So I think that I saw the first correct one come in from Michael. So Michael, you're going to be taking the swag in this case. A 5.7 inverter is going to be the right size for Julie. So with the details, we know we can oversize that 155%. We take the 5.7 times the 1.55. We know that gives us a max system size of 8.835. And what that means is that we can go up to that 8 kilowatt on the 5.7 inverter. So great answers, team. Awesome job. Moving on to our second scenario.
Dennis said, yeah, 30 amp breaker. Yep, correct. Yep. Well done.
All right, so looking at Ted's situation, Ted needs a little bit of a bigger system for his electrical needs. He's looking at a 14.3 kilowatt system. Now, the good news here is that he's adding a SolarEdge home battery, and he is going to be using it for self-consumption. So that gives us a little more flexibility. He's got a 200 amp main service panel. What size of inverter are we going to need to use on this installation? Seeing a couple different answers here. Kind of let some of these come in before we reveal.
Yeah. See a 10, a 7.6, 11.4, 10.
All right. So I think Tyrone was the first one to get it. And that is the correct answer here is that it is going to be a 7.6 kilowatt inverter for this one. When we're thinking about this one, team, because I see a lot of people going a little larger with the 10, the 11.4, it's not necessarily a wrong answer. But with that battery, we've got the ability to go all the way up to that 200%. Moving up to the 10 or the 11, that's going to make us do some main service panel work because he's on a 200 amp main service panel.
Yeah.
But if we take that 7.6 and we times that by 2, that means that we've got a maximum possible system size on the 7.6 inverter of 15.2 kilowatt, which gives us the flexibility to actually design that 14.3 on the 7.6 inverter. That's why this is usually kind of the home row for inverters for us, because it's so flexible. It can go so high with a battery.
Yeah, and to reiterate, like Ash is absolutely right. The answer we're looking for is 7.6 because we're trying to do a 40 amp breaker, etc. But if you're derating the main or a supply side or line side tap or PCS, yeah, you can go with a 10 or 11.4. Those are perfectly correct answers. It just involves a little more work. So if you just wanted to drop 40 amp breaker and do nothing else, then the 7.6 is the correct answer.
Awesome. All right, team. Well, with that, we wanted to spend some time today with our technical expert, Cameron. He's going to be able to answer your questions so much better than I will in most cases. So we're hoping that you brought some of those issues and questions that you've been having out in the field. That way we can troubleshoot those with you live. But we did have a couple sent in. I'm going to start out today's session with one of these because this is a question I get all the time, Cameron. This one's concerning a multi-battery system. So we had someone ask, hey, when they're using multiple batteries, they've got 2, 3 batteries on a system. Is there a situation they should spread those out and use a second inverter with multiple batteries, or should they try and keep them all under one inverter?
Yeah, that's a great question. So generally, I always try to recommend, and if you're installing in California or actually anywhere, really, you can use a 2-to-1 aspect ratio where you should probably have as twice the number of kilowatt hours to kilowatts DC that you have. So if you have a 5 kilowatt system, then you probably want around 10 kilowatt hours of energy storage. So in your question, like, hey, what happens when I have 2 batteries? Should I do 2 inverters? And it comes down to the needs of the customer. And if you're using a 3.8 kilowatt inverter and you need more energy to go to the grid, then I would split that across 2 inverters or maybe use a larger inverter. And it's about the ability to get more power. You know, with all of our inverters today, we can do 11.4 kilowatts in backup. So if it's just a backup question, like, can I get more power while I'm in backup? The answer is yeah, you can put those 2 batteries on a single inverter. And when you're in a backup scenario, you still get that really high backup power. And so it really comes down to the use application. So in general, I say if it's a 7.6 or bigger inverter, 2 batteries on that one inverter is totally fine. If you go down to a 3.8 kilowatt inverter, then yeah, maybe consider splitting up those batteries onto 2 different inverters. But again, you could go from a 3.8 up to a single 7.6 without an issue. So there's a lot of flexibility in SolarEdge. We have a lot of ability to suit whatever scenario you're looking at. So in general, I say, yeah, 2 batteries per 1 inverter is totally acceptable.
Hey, awesome. That's great information to know. It sounds like it's more complex of an issue than the simple question, but that's a lot of great insight on that.
Yeah.
Looks like we did have a question coming in through the chat. Is there a rule of thumb for string lengths for SolarEdge systems?
Yeah, sure. So as we have evolved our product to meet these giant modules that are coming out, we have changed our string design rule lengths. And before we used to say it's just look at the wattage, and it was like 5,700 watts per string. But when you get up to like a 440 watt module, that really limits your string length. So the general rule of thumb is if you have 2 strings, then it's 6,800 watts per string. And so you can do like 2 strings of 14 panels and basically get a 12 kilowatt system out of that. Or if you're doing like a single string design on a 5.7 kilowatt inverter, You can go up to like 12 kilowatts on that single string design. So if you're using just a single string, keep your inverter small. If you're using multiple strings, keep your inverter 7.6 or above. And then that string length is 6,800 watts per string. So we can do the quick math. If you had a 440 watt panel, you just take 6,800 watts, divide by 440, and that would be 15 modules per string, is what you can do. And speaking of strings, there was another question at the top that I said I would answer earlier. Someone's customer ran a designer and thought that they needed 4 strings on a 7.6 kilowatt inverter. Can you do that? Yeah, that is a totally valid design. You absolutely can do that. Now, SolarEdge power optimizers are current limiting devices, and if you keep your strings to 3 or less, you don't need fusing, and all of our inverters have 3 inputs on them, so you can run them straight to the inverter without problems. The second you get to the 4th string, now you have to fuse your string, so there's a little bit more cost and complexity in it, but you can do that. You can parallel those strings before you get to the inverter too. So I generally recommend try to keep your strings 3 or less. And again, at 6,800 watts per string, you're talking about 20, almost 20 kilowatts on our 11.4 kilowatt inverter. So there should never really be a need to do 4 strings, but it's totally a possibility that you can do.
Awesome. Great questions. Great answers, Cameron. Let's take that other question that was sent in advance because I hear this one all the time too when I'm talking to sales reps. If I need 2 inverters for a big system, how do I know which sizes to choose? Is there a best practice for sizes to use? Should they try and balance the 2 inverters as the same model? What's your best practice and recommendation there, Cameron?
Oh yeah, that's great. So if the inverters are co-located, I generally recommend balancing them, like 2 7/6s versus an 11/4 and a 3/8. But again, it's that kind of situational thing that sometimes happens. Like let's say you have a detached structure, maybe a garage, and you put just like a 8 panel system on that garage. Yeah, you can run a 3.8 kilowatt inverter on the garage, host that single string of panels, and then run an AC circuit back to the main service entrance on the main domicile. So that oftentimes is a little bit easier to do. And then have on the main house where your like 30 panel system is, have an 11/4 there. So yeah, it comes down to situation. In general, I recommend balancing. And a lot of that arose from we had different sized inverters for a while, but now that they're all the same size, it really doesn't matter. You can do 2 7/6s, you can do an 11/4 and a 3/8. It's totally up to you. And I think I will say, like, work with your distribution. Maybe it's more cost effective to do 2 7/6s versus an 11/4 and a 3/8. But that's totally up to you. So again, in general, I recommend balancing. The easy answer.
I love that. And again, thank you for sending the question in. I feel like I'm learning a lot today off of these questions. We had another one come in for the chat. What's with generator connect? Will it charge the batteries in a power outage?
Sorry, say that again. Will a generator charge a battery during a power outage? Oh, yeah, I see
Yeah.
right there. That's a great question. So we do have full generator support in a couple of different manners. So I'm going to answer the question first, and then I'll tell you what we can do. So the bad news is no, we cannot use the generator to charge the batteries. So SolarEdge has the belt and or suspenders kind of philosophy when it comes to running a generator. We can tell the generator to auto start or stop using a dry contact switch. So we can run a generator to tell it to turn on when your battery SOE gets low. We can run that generator. We can turn it off the next morning when your batteries start to charge and you're running on solar again. But we don't allow those two systems to commingle at this time. That's a roadmap item. And then we also have manual mode. So in manual mode, you can wheel out your pull start generator, turn it on, and run it. Now, the fundamental difference in manual mode is once you are running on a generator, you're stuck on running generator until the grid is restored. And so I generally recommend don't use those manual generators unless you absolutely have to. The sun will come up, the batteries will start charging, and we will start powering load when the sun does return the next morning. So we're very good at dark starting because we're DC coupled, and we do have generator support.
Awesome. Well, great to know about the features that are available on the generator and get a clear answer on whether or not they can charge batteries.
Yeah.
We have another question here. I think I can actually answer this one. In order to add a battery, do we have to upgrade the old SE7600 inverter with the latest model? It looks like he's asking, do you have to switch from an HD wave to a home hub? And yes, man. In order to add batteries, the Home Hub is our battery compatible inverter. So you would have to upgrade to the 7600 version of the Home Hub. Now, the great news, if you haven't heard about it yet, is we do have an awesome program for that for customers that are looking to make that upgrade and add batteries. We have the SolarEdge Re-Energize program that makes that really, really affordable. So if you haven't heard about that, then we can get you connected with your regional sales manager that can tell you more about that program.
Yes, it's as easy as trading in your cell phone. Like when you upgrade your cell phone, you give them your old one, you're like, I want $100 for this, and they just take it off the price of the new one. It's very similar to any tech swap program you have ever done. And it even like correct me if I'm wrong, Ash, does it cover like any inverter that SolarEdge has made like in the past like 10 years or something like that? Or do you know the rules around it?
Not 100%. I know that we're definitely upgrading the older HD wave inverters.
Okay.
For more details, I'd have to refer to somebody that's a little bit more of an expert than I am.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's a really cool program, and I totally it makes upgrading to batteries super simple.
Looks like we have another upgrade question here too. With a SolarEdge system expansion, would it be best to upgrade the single inverter to a larger size or add an additional inverter for increased production amounts?
That's a great question, and it's going to be the answer is regional specific. So if you're in California, I would say keep the AC nameplate rating of the inverter the same, and you can add solar to that. So in two of the utilities, SoCal Edison and SDG&E, you can upgrade your DC power so long as the original DC power was higher than the AC nameplate rating of the inverter. And you can upgrade that system and put more panels on it without incurring a NEM 3 or net billing tariff upgrade. So that is definitely the way to go. Uh, if you increase the AC nameplate rating of the inverter, you're only allowed like 1 kilowatt or 10% of the system size, whatever is lower. And so it's not really a great way to do that. So I'd always recommend DC side. If you're outside of California, then I totally recommend, yeah, again, I guess it comes down to DC to AC ratio. If your inverter has a very high DC to AC ratio, you're already at 155%, then I say, yes, upgrade the inverter so you can capture more of that energy and suffer less clipping. But if you have a low DC to AC ratio, then just throw some more solar panels on it. Oftentimes you can connect those solar panels right into the string. You can run a new string. So you can just add a new string to an inverter and call it a day and save that headache of replacing the inverter. But if you need to replace it, again, we have that re-energize program. The bad news is you have to swap like for like. So 7.6 or 7.6, you can't get the upgrade and say, oh, but I want to add more solar. Let's get the 11.4 and trade in a 7.6, I think.
Awesome. Well, it looks like the question came from Canada, so it sounds like that second recommendation is where we're
Yeah,
going to be going with for that one.
yeah, yeah, totally.
Looks like the Q&A. We had a follow-up on the string sizing that we were talking about. They want to know where they can find the documentation so that they can refer back to that when they're designing their systems.
Yeah, string sizing is on the Power Optimizer data sheet, and I've actually got one right here. Let me double check. Let me make sure. Yeah, okay, cool. I've got one right here. If I can share my screen real fast, Ash, do you mind?
Yeah, please do.
All right. All right. So this is the. I realize I'm way zoomed in right now. I'm so sorry. Let me zoom out a little bit. So this is the Power Optimizer data sheet for the most updated Power Optimizers that we have. 25-year warranty. You can see the S440, S500, 500B, and 650B. If you scroll down to the bottom here, you can see those rules. And this says that the maximum power per string is 5,700 watts. Now, someone had kind of a comment, string saturation. What does that look like? So this 5,700 watts is the max that the string will produce. So you'll clip at 5,700 watts if you decide to do 6,800 watts per string. So yes, you're going to see clipping, but in general, again, in general, when we look at solar panels, the power rating of a solar panel is determined at 1,000 watts per meter squared of a radiance, and just for a second during ideal light, ideal temperature. Most places in the US don't see that level of irradiance. We see about 800, or I should say most places in North America, like Mexico, Canada included, don't see 1,000 watts per meter square of irradiance. We see about 800. And so if you do the math, the difference here is about 80%. And so if you take 80% of 6,800, you get about 5,700 watts. So that's why we allow a higher threshold of power. And then again, I talked about single string design. And so if you're using a smaller inverter, you can, a 5.7 kilowatt inverter or below, you can put all of your panels on a single string, so long as it doesn't exceed the maximum DC-DC ratio of the inverter. And you can see that single string design guidelines. You can click that white paper right here to get more information on why that's allowed, how we do it. Again, the SolarEdge design tool will allow you to do those things. So if you have more questions, you can refer to the Power Optimizer spec sheet, or you can refer to the SolarEdge design tool. All right, Ash, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and you can reload the presentation.
Sounds good. And for those data sheets too, Cameron, they can find those on the Knowledge Center on our webpage, right?
Yeah, totally. That's the correct SolarEdge answer, to say, go to the Knowledge Center. What I do is I just Google SolarEdge Power Optimizer data sheet, and usually the one I want is on the top result.
I'm going to be 100% with you. That's exactly what I do too. All right, taking a look, we're diving back into these questions here. We've got a few more to go over. We've got another question about the Home Hub here. Does the Home Hub work with only SolarEdge batteries, or can it work with other batteries such as Tesla? And then are there any major technical issues we need to be aware of?
Yeah, that's great. So SolarEdge, we have a DC coupled platform where the batteries are on the same DC side as the PV array. Now, this offers a lot of benefits. Like, we have better dark start, we can charge our batteries more efficiently, we have a much more efficient system because we're not suffering the triple conversion penalty. We can overload our inverter really high and capture all that clipped energy. So a good example is like if you have a 10 kilowatt solar array and you have a 5 kilowatt inverter, we can take any of that clipped energy and put it into the battery. So there's many, many, many reasons why you want a DC coupled system. So SolarEdge batteries only work with SolarEdge inverters. They do not work with any other inverters. You can take a SolarEdge inverter with solar on it and AC couple it to a Tesla battery. That is a possibility. So I know for sure you can do it with the Powerwall 3. Powerwall 2. I am not 100% sure you can do it with Powerwall 3. I think you can. Not 100% sure, but you can AC couple our solar inverter to anything, really. So if you put a battery on it, on a Home Hub inverter, and then I'll had an additional like AC coupled battery, yeah, in theory that would work. You're just AC coupling, but you would not be able to do a SolarEdge backup system with that configuration. You'd be relying on someone else's backup system. And what are the kind of technical issues? You have to be able to program frequency watt control in many applications, and basically they shift the frequency a little bit to tell our inverter to power up or power down. Or they have a contactor that just opens up the inverter and says, yeah, I need you to turn off right now because my batteries are getting too full. And it's just a undesirable thing that happens when you're in backup. And so I would say I'm a big proponent for the ecosystem. If you're going to use SolarEdge, use SolarEdge. Those things are designed to work together. If you're going to use a different vendor, Tesla, Franklin, Enphase, whatever, use their ecosystem together. It's easier to get one brand to work with itself than multiple brands working together.
Got it. So overall, your best experience is going to be from using SolarEdge, and when you use a SolarEdge battery and you're coupling on the DC side, you're going to be avoiding that triple conversion penalty too. So you're going to be getting more energy out of that system.
Totally.
Looks like we had one come in during the presentation. Don't know if you answered this one, Cameron, but want to make sure if anybody else has this question that we get it answered for them too. How do we deal with optimizer size and bifacial modules? For example, does S440 work with a bifacial module with a nameplate rating of 440 watts, but with the bifacial effect could add 0 to 25%?
Yeah, so we've validated the optimizers for that power capability. So if you have a bifacial module, not a problem. We're aware of it. So yeah, if it's 440 watt on the without the backside gain, the backside boost, then yeah, you can use that on S440. Uh, we used to like make you do the math. What's your expected gain from the backside and which optimizer should you use? That is difficult for anyone to predict, especially when you're considering the albedo effect of the reflective materials around you. And so we just made it simple. Yes, you can put a SolarEdge power optimizer on a bifacial module, and the only thing you have to consider is the front side gain.
Awesome. That makes it super simple. Looks like we had another question asking if the slides were based on the HD Wave or the Energy Hub. To answer that question for you, everything in the presentation was based on the Home Hub, but all of the math that we used could be applied to the HD wave as well. So you would just take the sizing of those HD waves and times them by the 1.4 or the 1.5 to get that maximum system size. The only difference here would be that the HD wave doesn't support batteries. So you would never want to use the 200% with our HD wave solar only models. Looks like we've got another question. Any future with bidirectional? Add the new battery on. Is the new battery on track to release in Q3? Are there any data sheets available?
I'm assuming when you say bidirectional, you're talking about the bidirectional EV charger. So I'm gonna say the latest news on bidirectional EV charger is it's still a great idea. We still really like it. We've put it on kind of on the back burner to simmer a little bit as we develop our next generation inverter and battery, because that is critically more important than the bidirectional EV charger. The biggest use case I can give you for that is when most consumers go to buy their EVs, they're at the point of sale with their EV. They're getting their EV charger. They're not really thinking about long term how it's going to interact with their battery system, whatever. They just say, "Yeah, give me the level 2 fast EV charger." So that being stated, we'll continue with our level 2 EV charger that we have today. And then our bidirectional DC EV charger will be, 2026-ish timeframe. Any new batteries still on track to release here in Q3? Yes, we are pushing really hard to release our new battery. Q3 is when we start testing. And so like maybe that message got a little misheard or misremembered or whatever. So anyway, we're starting to test our new battery and new inverter system here shortly.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, Cameron, but one of the big challenges on developing that EV charger too has been waiting for auto manufacturers to kind of catch up with that capability as well, because we know it's a feature that a lot of homeowners do want, but at the same time, it's just not a feature that's being like widely supported yet.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So if you go down the list of EVs, I've done tons of research on this. If you go down the list of EVs, a lot of them say, yeah, they're bi-directional, and they're ready. And then when you try to program it to do anything, it doesn't work. So I think we're trying to develop a language that all EV chargers and EVs can use that we call power share, to be able to pull the energy out of the battery of the EV using the DC port or the AC port. So I think you're right. There's a lot of work that has to be done from EV manufacturers to allow this. And there's always questions about warranty, like, hey, can I warranty your battery? If you're constantly powering your house from it and you're going vehicle to home, maybe they only allow it in a grid outage. I don't know. So those are still questions that the industry has, that we're still trying to work through.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, great
Yeah,
news.
Jerry's
We're
right.
really we're really excited about it, but not there just yet. Looks like we've got a couple more questions, then we'll close out. One is, can we replace an old P optimizer with an S optimizer?
Yeah. So when you replace the old P optimizer with an S optimizer, we do allow that. The cable lengths are asymmetrical. So it's not as easy as just like a one-to-one swap. You do have to think about how your cables are going to be routed. Again, the reason we have asymmetrical cables is we can tell you if where that optimizer is on the roof, if the connectors are heating up. That's why we have asymmetrical cables. If they were the same length, then we would be able to tell. So that being stated, yes, you can swap a P320 with an S440 in most cases. We have a compatibility chart that tells you exactly which optimizers can be swapped. The general rule of thumb is check the output voltage. Some optimizers have a 60 volts output, and some optimizers have an 85 volt output. And if it's the same output voltage, then you can put them in the same string.
Awesome. I am not seeing any more questions. We've still got a little time, so if you guys want to toss some questions as we move on here, we're going to start working on closing out. I want to thank everybody for being here today. Hey, if it's your first time, if you just got this invite and this is your first Sales Elite event, I'd invite you to join the network if you're not already a member. If you scan this QR code, we'll get you signed up. It's just a bunch of free resources. Also, if you're looking for more information, you want to dig deeper on the sales side or deeper on the technical side, my recommendation would be to check out the SolarEdge North America YouTube channel. We have a lot of great content. Webinars like this, that's where they live after we finish up, after we're done with the live session. Also, I want to take a moment to thank you so much, Cameron, for being here to be able to answer these technical questions live. It does look like we had one more come through.
Yeah, about using the single optimizer with a three-phase inverter, the U651. I was under let me pull up that spec sheet. I can tell you. Sorry. Let me look it up.
I'm going to scroll up a little bit and see if I can find the original question as well, because it looks like it has a designer element to it.
Yep.
All right, so the exact question, Cameron, was, as recommended, they always use the designer, but SolarEdge designer doesn't seem to be allowing for the single optimizers on the U651 with the three-phase inverters. Is it a tech support issue, or does designer need an upgrade?
Yeah, I don't see why you would not be able to do single module on this optimizer. The spec sheet definitely says it. So I think you found a bug in the designer. Now, the good news is the designer is my product. So I get to go kick my product team around my team and say, hey, fix this. Thank you for reporting that bug. You should be able to do a single module to single optimizer, one-to-one design with this. And I don't have a good answer as to why it is not allowing that. So let me double check it on my side, and I'll get that corrected for you.
Awesome. And thanks for reporting that. Glad that we'll be able to look into that. Looks like we also had a question about the BUI. Can we hook a 24 kilowatt generator to two BUIs? Each BUI would have one 10 kilowatt inverter with two batteries hooked to each inverter.
Yes, this is a fun question. So I've done this. We have 400 amp service entrance, two buoys, one for each 200 amp panel that I was feeding, and we ran a 40 kilowatt generator to the backup interfaces. Now, the answer is yes, but you cannot run it in automatic mode. So we won't be able to auto start that generator, because if it's connected to two backup interfaces, you don't want to accidentally feed one backup interface that is not intended to be fed. And so you can only run that configuration in manual mode. And the best way to do it is from the generator, you go to an ACA aggregation panel, and you basically feed the generator on the supply side, and then split it up into two breakers and one to each backup interface. The homeowner then can toggle which breaker he wants for which backup interface. Maybe he wants to divert all power to a single backup interface. He can do that by flipping the breakers, but it is a very manual mode. It is not auto start. So ask your customer how much they're willing to do. and that may answer your question. No, I just wanted to automatically start and run my main home. Then fantastic, put it on one of the backup interfaces, and we do support 24 kilowatts on the BUI.
Awesome. Great answer. So I think we're going to go ahead and close out with that. Again, thank you so much, Cameron, for being here. Thank you for all of the great questions today. It looks like we did have somebody inquiring about reaching out for product. I'll reach out after the call to get a little bit more information so we can get you to the right person. If you've won swag today, I will be reaching out shortly to get your information so we can get that mailed out to you. So thank you so much for your participation, and looking forward to continuing to work with you guys, and see you next month when we do another one of these Sales Elite events.
Yeah, Ash, thanks for having me on, man. I had fun talking to salespeople about really technical things.
I only understood about half of it, but I still had a great time.
Killer.
All right, thanks, guys. Have a great day.